On today's episode, the Chicago Blackhawks are set to play in their second preseason game against the Minnesota Wild tonight. I'll go over the projected forward lines and defensive pairings, as well as Philipp Kurashev's season preview. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your weekend. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and follow me on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder, go and smash that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. If you're listening to the audio version of today's episode and you like what you're hearing, make sure to spread the word. Go and tell a friend or a family member. The start of the regular season is right around the corner, and you don't want to miss out on all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And thank you all for making the show, again, your very first listen here to start off your weekend. I hope everyone's weekend is treating them well so far. And I do want to say I apologize for not getting this episode out a little bit earlier in the morning. I was still, of course, the Chicago Blackhawks are set to play their second preseason game in just a couple hours here against the Minnesota Wild. That's a 6 p.m. Central Time puck drop up in Minnesota, by the way. And I do not believe, I'll double check for you all right now, but I do not believe it is set to be nationally broadcasted in Chicago. So for those of you out there who are wanting to tune in to the Blackhawks' second game of action, you might have to go the streaming route this evening. Yes, that is correct. I'm looking at the NHL app right now. It's not going to be on NBC Sports Chicago or something. So got to do your best to try to find another way. I'm going to do my best so I could cover the Blackhawks in action, second game of the season, of course. But I did want to get this out earlier. That was my intention, but we didn't have official confirmation on the Blackhawks lineup until about 11:30, 12 o'clock. So wanted to be sure that I had everything correct when I started today's episode. And also, for those of you golf fans who are tuning into this, the Ryder Cup got a little spicy this morning, and the Americans might have some live, but I'll save that for another podcast that I do. But getting into the Blackhawks' projected forward lines and defensive pairing, starting goaltender for their second game of the preseason tonight against the division rival Minnesota Wild. Looks like we're going to see basically everyone, for the most part, that didn't play in the first preseason game where the Blackhawks won 2-1 in overtime against the St. Louis Blues. So the top line that we're going to see in action tonight is Tyler Johnson, Cole Guttman, and Taylor Radish, which have worked basically all throughout training camp together. And if things were, if the regular season was set to open tomorrow, they would kind of be penciled in as the Blackhawks' third line. And we heard from Kyle Davidson and Luke Richardson leading into training camp about how they wanted to give their youngsters an opportunity to play down the middle. Connor Bedard on the top line center spot. Lucas Reichel not on the wing. He's beginning the season down the middle on the second line. And then Cole Guttman is the one who's getting a chance to kick things off, centering the third line. I do really like this line for the Blackhawks. Tyler Johnson, I think, is a really good veteran guy to add with these two youngsters, someone that it has a well-rounded game, but still has the ability to chip in offensively. And then for Taylor Radish, personally, as I'll talk about kind of a little bit later in this episode, kind of a spoiler alert, I like him on this third line. But personally, I think he's deserving of an opportunity inside the Blackhawks top six out of the gate with his goal scoring ability and the way that he finished last season. So kind of one thing I'm curious to see if Radish winds up getting that opportunity throughout training camp or the preseason, but he is opening things up. No surprise tonight alongside Cole Guttman and Tyler Johnson. Then the second line for the Blackhawks this evening kind of looks to be their extras. It's Boris Kachuk, Mackenzie Entwistle, and Joey Anderson. And quite honestly, one or two of these guys might be heading down to Rockford to begin the regular season. If I had to guess right now, it would probably be Joey Anderson and Boris Kachuk. Mackenzie Entwistle, I've thought, looked really good in the Blackhawks scrimmages, but it's a really big opportunity for that trio tonight. And of course, Kachuk and Anderson did a lot of good work late in the season with Drew Jarkera centering them. A really big game, first preseason action for all three of those guys. Then we're going to see a slew of Blackhawks prospects here on the third line in Samuel Savoie, Paul Ludwinski, and Colton Dock. The latter of those two were at training camp for the Chicago Blackhawks this time last year, but both actually got injured during the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase, so didn't get in any preseason action. This is their first little look, if I'm remembering that correctly. But we did see Samuel Savoie a couple of times in the preseason, and he loves to mix it up, loves to be a little bit of a goon out there, smile on his face, getting physical, getting feisty. And he didn't look out of place in the preseason, and he wasn't scared to mix it up with some big boys. So fully expect him to play with that edge again tonight in his first bit of preseason action. And then the fourth line for the Blackhawks, rounding out their forward group, is Anders Bjork, Brett Seney, and Reese Johnson, potentially setting up a line, or at least Seney and Bjork, I think, have a chance to play together down in Rockford to begin the season. Reese Johnson looks like he's headed there to begin the campaign as well, but probably not going to be in as much of an offensive-minded role as Anders Bjork and Brett Seney. Then on the back end, we are going to see Kevin Korchinski for the second game in a row for the Blackhawks. He's going to be playing on the top pairing, but he's not going to be alongside Connor Murphy tonight. He's getting the night off along with Seth Jones. That means Nikita Zaitsev is going to get into the Blackhawks lineup for the first time this preseason after kind of questionably not being bought out this offseason, which I thought was an interesting move, but the Blackhawks do need a little bit more veteran presence, and we're a bit thin on the right side of things. So I guess I kind of understand it, but at the same time, Zaitsev looked pretty awful after being acquired from the Ottawa Senators. And don't forget, they gave us a free second-round pick just to take him. So didn't look very good in Ottawa either. Going to be curious to see how he fares with the young Kevin Korchinski tonight. Then we're going to see Isaac Phillips, and Nolan Allen is getting in the lineup once again, but he's going to be playing on the right side. But I do think this is a really interesting pairing because, as I've mentioned a couple of times in the last few days, Nolan Allen really seems to be rising through the ranks right now and clearly is someone that Luke Richardson really likes. He's been outspoken about him numerous times during his media sessions, and it seems, like he is giving Allen an opportunity. I don't know how likely it's going to be, but he's giving him all the opportunities in the world to make this Blackhawks team out of camp. Again, I don't think it's going to happen, but they sure seem to be impressed with Nolan Allen, and he kind of seems to have bumped Isaac Phillips at this point in time. It seems like Phillips is kind of a shoo-in right now to begin the season down in Rockford. So a really big game for both of those two. And then Ethan Del Mastro and Louis Crevier are rounding out the third defensive pairing. They've been together all throughout training camp so far as well, and I fully expect them to get a lot of time together this season down in Rockford. In net for the Blackhawks is going to be their backup this season, and Arvid Soderblom, who's getting his first, full-time NHL campaign for the Blackhawks this year. Spent the last 2 seasons after coming over to North America down with the Rockford Ice Hogs. Mostly the Blackhawks had some injury concerns that, led to him being called up and whatnot, but he's getting his first full-time crack this season. And there's been a lot of good reports coming out from Blackhawks camp about Arvid Soderblom, how they feel he has that it factor and could potentially be the goaltender of the future for the Chicago Blackhawks, which is a really interesting debate in and alone of itself. Is it going to be Soderblom, Comesso, Stauber you could keep in that mix? Dominic Bassey's probably the most unlikely one of the bunch, but he had a really good college season last year. Then, of course, they drafted Adam Guyan with the first goaltender off the board in the 2023 NHL draft. So it's going to be interesting to see which one or two of those guys truly emerge in these next couple of years, but undoubtedly a good situation for the Blackhawks to be in. But I'd expect Soderblom to play the first half of the game, and then Mitchell Weeks is backing him up. He'll probably come in for the second half. But as far as the Minnesota Wild are going, it's kind of a similar lineup for them. I do think they have most of their big-time defensemen in the lineup, but their forward group is quite honestly a little lacking. They are playing Carson Lambos, Kalen Addison, John Merrill, and Alex Goligoski. So as I referenced, a good chunk of their NHL defensemen are going to be playing tonight. But out of their forward group, they're going to be led by Sammy Walker, who scored a hat trick at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase against the Blackhawks. They'll have Brandon Duhaime there, Connor Dewar, Vinny Lettieri is going to be there. Blackhawks legend Jujhar Khaira is suiting up tonight. The really interesting point to keep an eye on is whether or not Philip Gustafsson is going to be getting the start. He was listed on their active roster, but it's either going to be him or Zane McIntyre, which obviously makes a pretty good difference considering Philip Gustafsson was one of the best goaltenders in the NHL last season. So keep an eye on whether or not he gets to start in net tonight for the Wild. As far as a couple other storylines that I think all you Blackhawks fans should be watching throughout this preseason game, first and foremost, it's Soderblom's first game of preseason action. And like I just referenced, there's been a little bit more buzz behind him leading up to this season. And I do wonder if at some point in time this year, given that Peter Mrazek, he did look good down the stretch for the Hawks last year, and I'll give him credit for that, but undoubtedly it was a shaky season as a whole. And if Soderblom, can find momentum like he has in Rockford these last couple of years and takes that next step, I'm curious as to whether or not he's going to take over the starting load, and if so, when that is going to occur. So going to see how Arvid Soderblom fares out of the gate tonight against Minnesota. I also think you got to keep an eye on that third line of Tyler Johnson, Cole Gutman, and Taylor Radish playing as the top line for the Blackhawks tonight, of course, but as I referenced, kind of seeming to be the third line for Chicago if they were to open things up. If this were a regular season game, that's probably where they would be. So you want to see if they're establishing chemistry, considering they've been together for the greater part of the last 2 weeks now. And then I think you also just got to keep an eye on all the young defensemen in the lineup. Kevin Korchinski's getting another game of action. Obviously, that's a storyline in and alone of itself, whether or not he's going to make the team. I just outlined how Nolan Allen is really getting all these opportunities. And then Isaac Phillips is getting his first crack, and same with Ethan Del Mastro and Louis Crevier. So I do think there are plenty of things to keep an eye on in the Blackhawks matchup with the Wild tonight, despite them not rolling out, neither team's rolling out their NHL lineups. All right, folks, don't go anywhere, because coming up in just a moment, I obviously have to get into forward Philipp Kurashev's 2023-2024 season preview. But first, I got to talk to you all about FanDuel. Football season is underway, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every single time that they win in the regular season. Just don't bet on the Chicago Bears, because obviously they haven't won in basically a calendar year. So not looking good for them. But for any other NFL team, you can pick any of them and you'll get bonus bets every single time that they win in the regular season. And you can use these bonus bets to bet on anything from the money line to the point spread, over-unders, and even player props. And I personally, it's gone cold the last 2 weeks. I've talked about this a couple of times, but betting on the over of Justin Fields' rushing yards, it was dynamite for quite a while there. And I'm really hoping that the Chicago Bears just start to let him play his football, because the pocket passer stuff with the weapons and the scheme that they have, it ain't working. Regardless, I won a lot of money betting on FanDuel, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, I love when I win, they pay me out instantly. And you can sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to start earning your bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to start earning bonus bets right now. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, be sure, please, to go and smash that like button for me. I would greatly appreciate it. Comment down below as to what your expectations are for forward Philipp Kurashev entering his 4th NHL season. And then, of course, go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. And also go and tell a friend. The start of the regular season is right around the corner. If you love this show, please go and spread the word. This is the best spot, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Go and smash that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. All right, segment 2. Time to get into another one of my Chicago Blackhawks season previews. As you all know by now, having the honors today is none other than 23-year-old forward Philipp Kurashev, who is set to turn 24 years old here in just a couple of weeks. And believe it or not, is already entering his 4th NHL season with the Chicago Blackhawks. Crazy to think, just how fast time truly does fly. I feel the same way with Connor Murphy, who I just had a season preview on yesterday. And by the way, if you want to get all caught up on the season previews, if you're not, you can easily do so on the YouTube channel. I've already gone over Connor Bedard, Taylor Hall, Seth Jones, Andreas Athanasiou, and Connor Murphy. You can easily go find that on the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. But yeah, Kurashev was a 4th round pick for the Blackhawks back in the 2018 NHL draft. I remember he actually was, or that draft pick, I guess, was received by the Blackhawks from the Nashville Predators as part of the Ryan Hartman trade that sent him to Nashville all those years ago. But Kurashev, for being a 2018 fourth round pick, he really burst onto the NHL scene pretty quickly in the 2021 campaign, COVID shortened campaign, because he only played 39 games of AHL action before becoming a full-time NHLer. He was a full-time NHLer for the Blackhawks like that right out of the get-go. And when I was kind of going through things, I remember back to the time when Philipp Kurashev was like considered the Blackhawks' best forward prospect in the entire pipeline, which I think goes to show you all the great work, again, that general manager Kyle Davidson has done since taking over. And I don't really mean this as a knock on Kurashev, but when he was the top forward prospect in the pipelines, to think that he was in that position and quite honestly just hasn't really shown any signs of being like a top six forward. Yeah, it really goes to show you the true turnaround that the Chicago Blackhawks have had. But for Kurashev, like I said, he's been given a top six opportunity. And what's been interesting is it seems like he's getting that opportunity again for the Chicago Blackhawks right out of the gate. He hasn't really made the most of it. And consistency has been the biggest issue for Philipp Kurashev. I think everyone can attest to that because he will give you these flashes every now and again. And he has the speed and at times he has the skill game as well. But now entering his fourth NHL season, it's kind of time to put it all together. But I'm really curious to see what Philipp Kurashev's role is going to be because at this point in time, I don't really know. The interesting thing is, like I just said, he's still getting a top six opportunity to begin training camp for the Blackhawks alongside Lucas Reichel and Andreas Athanasiou on that second line. But in the preseason opener, when Kurashev scored the first goal of the preseason for the Blackhawks, he was actually out there on the ice with Connor Bedard and Taylor Hall for that shift because of a previous extended shift by Ryan Donato. And that kind of led me to, talking about whether or not Kurashev is going to get an opportunity on the right wing spot with Connor Bedard, because personally, I don't think Ryan Donato is it at this point in time. And I would rather see over Donato, I'd rather see someone like Kurashev, mostly for me, Taylor Radish. But it does feel like the Blackhawks are still giving him a chance to be a top six forward. But in my mind, personally, and I could be drastically wrong, but from what Philipp Kurashev has showed me, I just don't believe him to be a true top six forward of the future for the Chicago Blackhawks. And look, maybe he gets the job done this season. Maybe he fits that role and kind of benefits, I think, from playing with some more skill guys. But I still believe long-term, he's a third or fourth liner of the future. And for that reason, I'd rather see someone like Taylor Radish get an opportunity on that top line with Bedard and Taylor Hall, who has that goal scoring upside. And I think in the right spot, Taylor Radish could be a 30 goal scorer at some point in time. Maybe I'm overhyping him a little bit, but I trust his offensive ceiling more than I trust Philipp Kurashev's at this point in time. So we'll see what Philipp Kurashev's role ends up becoming because it seems like the Blackhawks are still giving him the chances, but from what I've seen in the past, and look, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think he's the right fit long-term for the Blackhawks. So going to be curious to see what winds up being Philipp Kurashev's role for Chicago this season. But before I talk about his expectations and some of the other things, I do want to just quickly go over the stats that he's put up these last couple of years. In the 2021-2022 campaign, his second NHL season, he played in 67 games. Kind of a down year, honestly, for Kurashev. 6 goals and 15 assists for 21 points. A middle six opportunity for the most part. Had 2 power play goals. What's interesting is he shot 7%, which, is actually like not terrible, but to only have 6 goals tells you he really wasn't all that aggressive with the puck on his stick. He wasn't firing the biscuit on net very often. And he did average 13 minutes of ice time. So not the most meaningful role, but I still think it was a bit of a down year for Philipp Kurashev, considering we wanted to see him take that leap from his rookie season. And then this past year is when he got mostly a top 6 opportunity for a majority of the campaign. But in 70 games, he still only put up 25 points, didn't hit 10 goals, 9 tallies, and 16 assists for those 25 points. Didn't have a single power play goal. And again, he shot 7.8% in 70 games. That's not a terrible shooting percentage. It's not great, but it's not outrageous. So for him to still only have 9 goals, it just tells me he's still a little bit of a tentative player. And I just don't think he's a true top 6 piece. And his time on ice jumped up by over 4.5 minutes. He averaged 17 minutes and 25 seconds of time on ice for the Blackhawks last year. I have some concerns about his long-term future as a top 6 guy. And I think a lot of people feel the same way, that he's probably just not a top 6 fit. So that's why I'm so interested to see what's going to become of him this year. But with that being said, too, he's also not really much of a shot blocker or a physical presence. Had 38 hits for the Blackhawks in 70 games last year, won every other game. Not really a huge penalty kill guy. So yeah, that's kind of where I feel like Philipp Kurashev could be a little bit of an awkward tweener moving forward, and why this season is also so big for him personally, figuring out what he's going to be at the NHL level. All right, folks, coming up in just a moment, I still have to get into my expectations for Philipp Kurashev this season and what I believe would make for a successful season out of him. All right, segment 3, picking up where I left off. Let's get into my expectations for Philipp Kurashev heading into his 4th NHL campaign. And because of the things that I just talked about and the concerns that I have about Philipp Kurashev's long-term fit for his role right now, I think my expectations are maybe a little bit different than what some people would have, because I don't see him as a true top 6 forward. So I'd kind of like to see him progress and develop his game in other areas. Now, would I still like to see him, work on his offensive production? Yeah, the consistency is really what's kind of been a killer for him. I definitely think he needs to be more consistent than he has the last 2 years. That's just been the biggest problem for Philipp Kurashev, is we just haven't seen it often enough, despite all the opportunities that he's been given. So I think finding a solid baseline is really my biggest expectation for Philipp Kurashev entering the season. And then, given that I think he's more of a third liner down the road, I would just like to see him kind of become a bit more rugged and tougher to play against, and to further round out his game. Like, I still feel like he's a little bit thin and he gets pushed around out there. And again, maybe that's not his game, but that's why I more so would feel like he would turn into this awkward tweener with all the forward talent that the Blackhawks are going to be having come up these next few years, right? That could leave Philipp Kurashev in a really awkward position if he doesn't develop other areas of his game. So that's why I think it's so crucial for him to do that this season, instead of being that awkward kind of tweener forever, where not quite good enough to be a top 6 guy, but when you put him in the bottom 6, he really doesn't mesh well either, because those aren't offensive-minded roles. So it's a really interesting situation for Philipp Kurashev, and I almost feel like, I know it's tough at 23 or 24 years of age, but he's got to look himself in the mirror and know he's not going to be the guy alongside Connor Bedard. That's not why the Blackhawks, drafted him in the first place, and that's not where they're going to want him to be long-term. So I do feel like my biggest expectation for Philipp Kurashev, if he wants to cement himself as a piece of this Blackhawks future, is to further round out his game a little bit. And I think that's the biggest part of what will make this a successful season. He has to find that level of consistency, that solid baseline. And I also think it's time for him to start playing like a man too. Like, he's got to get a little bit tougher. He's got to get harder to play against, and he's just got to be more present on a nightly basis. I also think it would be huge for him. I think he's going to get an opportunity on the second power play unit, at least out of the gate, if he could weaponize himself in that area, especially if Lucas Reichel is going to be playing on the second unit, if they're going to be splitting up him and Connor Bedard to kind of balance things out. It's really big for Philipp Kurashev to kind of take advantage of that opportunity as well, especially if he's trying to play this skill game long-term, which I don't think the depth chart favors him in that area. So that's why I think it would be a successful season for Kurashev if he gets stronger, kind of starts turning into a man a little bit more, and just becomes more well-rounded and reliable in all types of situations. And then as far as my projection goes, this is a really tough one as well, because I'll admit I could be wrong on Philipp Kurashev. I don't think I am. But maybe he does wind up making the most of this opportunity and proves me wrong, but I'm still not expecting it. So as far as his projection goes, and again, one thing I do want to outline for you all as well, I'm just doing this based on an 82 game projection, and Philipp Kurashev's never played more than 70 games in a season. So obviously you got to keep that in mind when going through all of these things, but I do believe he is still capable of putting up career best numbers. And if you look at his numbers, they have been kind of slowly they have been slowly incremented. They have been getting better year in and year out as he's been getting more and more of an opportunity. So I do think it's possible. I think he's going to score 14 goals is what I have him at. That would be a career high. I also have him penciled in for 24 assists, which would be a career high. And then, of course, the 38 points total would be a career high as well. But still, I think that's more of what he is, a 35, 40, 45 point getter. That's just my personal opinion on him. And from what I've said before, I'd personally like to see Taylor Radish get an opportunity up on that top line first. But Kurashev still is in a really good spot if he's going to be playing on the second line. I think Lucas Reichel is set to have a big year. I mentioned Athanasiou, I think, could be a 50-point guy this season. I'm going to have Philipp Kurashev at 38 points for the Blackhawks with 3 power play goals while averaging 15 minutes and 30 seconds of time on ice. All right, folks, I think that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, and you'll be able to get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. My goodness. As always, I apologize for everyone that heard that. I'm your host, Jack Bushman, a shameful Jack Bushman at this point in time. If you don't hate me, go and follow me on Twitter at Jack Bushman2, or you can check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, it's going to do it here from the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.